Hi, you all. Thank you for watching Bread with the Sisters. So we're doing a part 2 with Mr. Austin here, as well as dear Jordan Pacheco from gladtradpodcast.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
It's their first time meeting, so please let them have their moment.
I know.
It's our moment.
I'm happy that we're in this moment together.
Yeah.
Jordan, can you actually tell us a little bit? Because I don't think Austin knows, but he has a podcast called gladtradpodcast.
Okay.
What is it about? Why is it called gladtrad?
Yes. Okay. Yes. So my good buddy Rudy, who you've met before, and I have a podcast called the Gladtrad Podcast. It highlights a lot of the exciting and positive changes in Orthodoxy and the growth of latinmass in the Catholic Church. But also, we're like young millennial kind of guys, and we're happy. We're trying to put a really positive spin, despite the fact that there's a lot of dark things in the church also that we're just kind of confronting. Mm-hmm. So we talk not just about like tradition and orthodoxy and the resurgence of a lot of really good virtues, but we also talk about like Catholic memes. We just had an episode on. We just talked about like pipe smoking and the traditional movement, and we kind of keep things like very kind of Chesterton. Our tagline is Risus et Bellum, laughter and war, which we kind of hit a little bit.
Both.
Yeah.
So Jordan, how does this lead to the liturgy and noticing the difference? Okay, what is liturgy to you? And do you see a difference from church to church?
Well, I mean, it doesn't matter what the liturgy is to me necessarily, because it matters what the church, I suppose, says. But,
okay.
It's like, so, the liturgy, of course, for me, what's cool about Catholicism just generally is the fact that Mass is literally where heaven and earth meet. Transubstantiation is to see that moment, whether it's at Novus Ordo or in Latin Mass, always brings a sort of tear to my eye, because just how radically what's happening there, that God has come down and become man and is now living in us that we may be conformed to him. Absolutely powerful. And so, I think that you're going to obviously see differentiations. There are more than just like two rites inside the Catholic Church anyway. I've been down to the Melkites, which they have the liturgy in Greek and Arabic. I've been to Ukrainian Catholics, which is one of the most beautiful liturgies I've ever seen. Byzantine Catholics, of course. And even in the Novus Ordo, I've been to the masses at St. Thomas Aquinas College and St. Michael's Abbey. Really reverent. I mean, it's like Latin Mass in English, essentially. Been to the Anglican Ordinariate too, which is like High Elizabethan English. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's like, it's like there are tenets of what makes a faith the faith that shouldn't be messed with in my mind, or shouldn't be, maybe not messed with is the right word, but really shouldn't fall to the priest to kind of leave by the wayside or not, because every single action has just such a mist of mysticism behind it. And it's kind of cool to like see that structure coming from the priest a lot of times, or the priest like showing it in each and every liturgy. So all the repetitive movements, things that as growing up I didn't really understand, things now that I don't even understand, a lot of it just became like it's unlocking each and every time I go to the Mass now.
And would you say for both of you, like there's a reverence that's there, and how would you describe it?
That's there where?
In the church.
Well, I mean, one of the things I think is interesting. So from my perspective, I'm a fulfilled Jew, a convert to the faith, if you will.
Welcome home.
So for me, one of the things that is interesting is I came in, like I said in a previous podcast or episode, about the fact that On Eagle's Wings was something that I felt it kind of hooked me and started making me think about something deeper. And it's interesting how that happens. But the more I find, the more you go into understanding, and through my years in the seminary, of what the liturgy is and that it's not, at the end of the day, it's not about us. Mm-hmm. Throughout all this experience with COVID, everyone keeps saying, I don't get to go to Mass. We are not needed for the Mass to happen. Mm-hmm. The priest is the necessary minister for Mass to continue. We are a secondary to that primary, which is the priest. But understanding our place in the liturgy, understanding what the liturgy is in our life, understanding that we participate in one way or another with the heavens and earth colliding, is something that I think throughout this experience these last couple of months, people have maybe come to terms with, that it's something that's essential to our life. It's not just something I go to on Sunday or every day. It's something that I'm able to participate in. And otherwise, my life seems pretty mundane without that fragmentation of heaven and earth coming together, without that ability to experience those things, and that the eschaton, kind of the looking at the eschaton, understanding the transubstantiation, the fact that Jesus Christ comes down in this building, whether it's beautiful or not. One of the things I think is important to really discuss, and I think should be very clear, is there's so much now in Catholic media about the us versus them, them and versus them, and everyone in this one, and everyone has their little corner of the world, and it's problematic at best. I'm a Roman Catholic, and this means that I adhere to the teachings of the Roman Catholic Church. This means that while I, for one, prefer to go to the Extraordinary Mass, if someone goes to a Novus Ordo Mass, that's okay. Why?
And why?
Because the church says so. The church says both are valid masses. And we were talking about this on the way up here today, that it was even before I knew we were talking about this. There's this belief by some people that you get more grace because you go to one Mass or the other. Because if you go to the Extraordinary Mass, more grace, you're closer to heaven. I just don't find the truth in that. You can be more disposed to being open to that and being more disposed to the graces that come from being in an extraordinary form and having the polyphony and all the other things opening up your heart and your mind and you're able to understand it more. There's a connection to that. But I think when we start saying this is better than that, we're saying we know more than the church does. The church says both are valid. Both Jesus comes down to during both. Jesus is present in both. We just have to understand that I think these are vehicles for the devil to separate us. Personally, I think there's this belief in this kind of waxing poetic, and this is the I joke with people that are big into Chesterton, is that there's this belief that back then everything was great.
Yeah.
Before Vatican II, everything was wonderful. And the Vatican II causes. It's just not true. It's not factual.
And why is that? It seems like
because we were nostalgic for the time when everything was everyone dressed a certain way and everyone went to Mass.
There's always an in the garden, I always call it, an in the garden perception. Like if only, I certainly, and of course, being heavily involved as I am, I do know that you see all the factionalization, even the sub-factionalization, It's one thing to be like Novus Ordo Catholics, traditional Latin Mass Catholics, and then inside there's all these little things. I find, to your point on Chesterton, like part of my stylings on being a glad trader or having a podcast for that kind of thing is I find a lot of the solution in a lot of Chesterton. Like there's this Chesterton's kind of joy in his apologetic work, his understanding of things.
As it should be. It is called the joy of the gospel.
That's exactly right, yeah.
But it's one of those things, I think, again, we have to go back to the fact that when it comes to the liturgy is a gift from God to us. We have to embrace it. But we have to be open to the idea that we're not always going to understand it. I don't understand how we have both these things now. But if we want to be honest, I think that we can look to the Novus Ordo in the big scheme of things as something that's going to help us. Because the resurgence of the extraordinary form community is something different than that was existent before 1965.
No one seems to think of that as
they have to, because before that, you could point to so many priests from that generation where they didn't even understand the Latin very well. They were up there miming words and just mumbling because they didn't know what they were doing.
I watched the funeral mass for JFK recently.
It's just true. It's just true, and people all this stuff was added just because we have to add it, and we do these things because that's what they did back then. And it's just stupid, to be completely blunt. I think what we have to look at is because of God's understanding through the world and our own brokenness as human beings, society exploding at the exact same time, and abuse of the liturgical practices, the abuses that came, we do not, Bernini and all the things that came out of that was wrong. But we have to look at it even through that. God makes right crooked paths, right? So God is utilizing, I believe, the Novus Ordo as a way to resurge it, to bring us. What does it mean to be an active participant in Mass? It doesn't mean like what we take in the extreme of the Novus Ordo, that I have to constantly be saying something, doing something to be participant. It means I have to be present. Because the big joke before Vatican II, before the changes, was in most masses, most parishes didn't have what you have at FSSP parishes. They had
it was a low mass over in
and it was boring, and no one did anything, and you just sat there. And everyone was
not boring though.
But it was boring. But it was boring. It was objectively boring in the sense of you're not participating. And I don't mean participation. I'm doing something, but I'm not present to it. I'm there because that's what I got to do. I have had the blessing to go to the Philippines multiple times in the last year, and during that experience, while they are a beautiful people, this is an example of the fact that people go to Mass because it's what you do. And I want to get people going to Mass because they want to encounter Jesus Christ, right? And I think the Novus Ordo has helped us encounter that. Has it went to the extreme? Yes, probably. But it's through that now we have a resurgence of young people who are wanting to go deeper, who have a desire to go closer. Because that wasn't that wasn't true before. And I think one of the things we have to point out, again, I just get so frustrated with this belief that everything was great before Vatican II. The bishops that brought about all these changes that everyone seems to hate were pre-Vatican II priests and bishops. They let this stuff happen. So where's the breakdown? I think the Holy Spirit is allowing for this to happen to understand. And I think people are desiring it more because of what it is, not because of what it represents.
What do you say to people who have separated themselves into these two camps, and they're not willing to extend that charity that you say that and welcoming and saying both are valid under the church and should not be diminished in any way because it's still a holy mass. How do you get that to them? Because it becomes this segregation of I'm better than you, as you said, for these certain reasons.
Well, I mean, I am better than you, but I'm not.
But not me. But not me. Thank you. Just want to make that clear.
No, but it is one of those things. Like, there's this. I don't see it so much in the Novus Ordo. I see more in Novus Ordo, at least in my perspective, that there's a disdain for the extraordinary form in the sense of like that's people caught up in the old days and they've lost touch of reality of modernity. But I see the opposite is the thing that I want to fight, because if we do believe that there is a greater beauty within the extraordinary form, I want more people to be open to going and experiencing it. The more we keep ourselves, and I am known for just being really honest, so I hope that's okay with people at home.
Yes, please.
But there's a reason why the extraordinary form community has such a bad reputation. These reputations come from something. That there's this is our thing, and if you don't know what you're doing, not my problem. And they're not. But this is it. I'm not saying this is everywhere, but it is a general impression. So we have people like you, people like me, have to be opening, inviting people to come, wanting to encounter. I will say I've been to St. Vitus once, and I was impressed with the community there. It was very opening and welcoming. But that's not the norm, unfortunately. And so for me, one of the things I try to do as somebody, I'll just give you a real example. Last year I was with a friend of mine driving to dinner with him and his wife, and I was in the front seat and the passenger seat, and we were talking about, and this friend of mine is an adult, and he serves the extraordinary form mass. And I said, the problem is they don't have people that are good examples of what it is to be a normal guy in that serve the extraordinary form mass and are part of the extraordinary form mass and all that. And I said, you're a great example. And so I called up a friend of mine right then, who's a TV producer in New York. Long story short, a week later, they were doing a video of him, and this whole video, his name is Harrison Butker. He's the star kicker in the NFL.
Okay.
And there's a whole video. It's one of the highest watched videos.
Yeah.
And that came from me saying something to him in the car.
I just recently watched this video.
Yes. And my buddy Colin, the Irish filmmaker, went down. But it was those things of like showing. Here's a normal guy. He's an NFL player. People look up to him. But because it shows why did you feel called to the extraordinary form community? Not because it's a place for me to go, because it shows I'm up here for people.
Yeah.
And one other thing I think I'd like to discuss. I've not discussed this publicly yet because I've just been putting it off. But I think this is a good avenue and a good venue to do that. Cool. SSPX. Right?
Yeah.
Am I right?
Am I right?
I am so sick of this idea that because people have a large following on social media or whatever they do, that they have a degree on something, they think that they know everything and they're better than the church. I don't care if you have a PhD or an STV, either or, you are not in the magisterium of the church, and your opinions are just that, opinions.
Yes.
The Society of St. Pius X is not schismatic anymore, but they are outside the church.
But they're still outside.
Irregular. Yeah.
And I had something happen recently where a follower of mine contacted me regarding something I posted about the sex abuse scandal with SSPX. And the woman said, "Oh, that priest that they mentioned has been excommunicated, has been laicized." And I asked her, I said, "By whom?" She goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "Excommunication is only done by the Holy Father, and they don't listen to the Holy Father. So who excommunicated or who laicized their priest?" There you go. And so I'm sick of the discussion because, in my opinion, SSPX is no worse and no better than a Protestant. There are people that say they know better.
Yeah.
And I love the beauty of the Trinity Mass, but I get so sick of people's belief that because we do something outwardly that's beautiful, that's enough. And that I go to the extraordinary form mass and I pray a rosary every day, but I beat my wife in the weekends and I abuse my children and I'm an awful human being and I'm not nice to anybody. But I go to the extraordinary form mass. I've got the higher check mark, the gold star because I do this. It's just wrong.
Yeah.
The beauty on the exterior has to match the beauty on the interior. It has to be both and.
Yeah. If I can kind of, what I see and what I've kind of read too, because it's absolutely all right. What we're seeing, or at least what I think we've seen, and certainly a lot of this is in the traditional movement, because in all Catholics, right? And again, like I grew up in a very, very with very like Orthodox parents, and I grew up in a very Orthodox family. Again, coming to the extraordinary form, there wasn't really anything very different that I believed, and that was just my nurturing. I didn't have to grow into it, so to speak. And so one thing that's funny is I think that what we're seeing a lot of times is more or less actually two sides of a great divorce. this would happen. And I see it with a lot of with friends of mine who attend the Novus Ordo or are after very reverent ones, or I have family members who are, we have conversations on the human characteristics of the liturgy. Because one thing in my family that we say is after every mass, my father would call or talk and he'd be like, well, how was the mass? Regardless of what mass it was, I say it's perfect. That's the thing that we say in the family, because it's true. It's like, if this confers grace, if this, if the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ transubstantiates itself on the altar, of course it's perfect. After that, then the side of us, which does talk about liturgy, order, music, all these sorts of things can take over. And I think they're all extremely valid conversations. What you see, I think, with a lot of the young people coming in, and, it's like me, who's a cradle, who never had any experience of an in the garden kind of time. And also as a historian, like, what's very funny, of course, is that the church, prior to the Reformation, like, the church did need to reform. The Council of Trent didn't just start of its own Cthulhu, but, it's the one day they woke up and the whole of Northern Europe had gone Protestant. And in a lot of ways, like, yeah, we need to really seriously talk about this. And they did. Because how you talk about standardization of your priest education, how priests are allowed to, what does celibacy mean, to revitalize that, the importance of the Counter-Reformation. Take the time that, St. Francis of Assisi was coming in. Well, the church has gotten out of the pornocracy, which was essentially the papacy and the cardinalate being run by a bunch of aristocratic Roman prostitutes, shall we say, in those families. I mean, genuinely. So there's always a history of renewal and decay in the church that we have to be honest about. I think about this a lot of times. Like, yeah, there's never an in the garden kind of experience.
That's a good point to touch on too. The renewal and the decay. Like, can you?
But that's where we're at right now. This is the thing is. I say this a lot when I speak publicly, that I truly believe that we're living in the best time to be alive as a Catholic.
Okay, why?
Because of the fact that it's through this pruning of the bush that beauty is coming out even more. We're seeing more and more young people desiring to grow closer with Jesus Christ. We have more people, young people, desiring to go deeper in their faith and what that means, and to live out their faith at a time that's even less popular than before. And at a time when our Catholic faith is completely beats the wall against society. We're living in the bastion of societal beliefs that are out the wazoo of things that we just do not at all support. Right here in this place where we're at right now.
That's right.
To be a Catholic, we're living these white martyrdom right now where our beliefs are so outside the norm that we do suffer, in a way, these little tiny cuts to who we are as a person. That it hurts to feel like you are always constantly having to be careful what you say, not to offend, not to get fired, not to get sued, you name it. And so I truly believe all these little things that we're encountering, the more we enter into that woundedness, the more we enter into that suffering, the better off we're going to become. And I believe it's easier to be an amazing Catholic. It's easy to be a good Catholic in good times, but it's even harder and better to become a great Catholic in difficult times.
Now that's good. Can I touch on a point now? Because I have friends in the extraordinary community.
Earth chat.
I'm proud of you, Raven.
It's hard to come by, but I have friends in the extraordinary community who, since this whole ordeal of COVID and the churches being closed, and especially with us being completely rid of the sacraments, they have gone to other churches in search of it. And,
what do you mean by other churches?
And other churches meaning SSPX.
But not a church.
So what do you think, especially in terms of being a good Catholic?
Wrong. The number one thing you can
because
do in this
they think,
why
why do you rid me of?
They're wrong. We have something. There's something. I think it was either Saint Therese. I think it was Saint Therese who talks, or maybe it's Saint Faustina who talks about obedience. At the end of the day, it's not on our hands. We are not bishops. We are not successors of the apostles. Yeah. The bishops have to answer for this. If this was a wrong call, they have to answer for this. The priests and bishops, they have to answer for these things. As laity, we are called to be obedient. I'm not saying be sheep and we just kind of cover our heads and just go with whatever they tell us, but within reason, within their purview, which this falls within the bishop's purview to do, we have to be obedient. To say that I'm not getting what I want or what I think I want, even if it's a good intention, I'm going to go off to this thing that's not within the church. That's not obedience. That's not love, and it's not an understanding of what it is to be a Roman Catholic. It's very frustrating to me.
We had a podcast very recently called on the limits of obedience, because this whole our priests, I'll say this to the greatness of our priests at St. Vitus, who are really living out, I would say, like a holy calling to being priests. And in my life, I've encountered a lot of priests, and so when one comes in my life, my orbit, who really exudes that kind of quality, like especially as a young man, like you gravitate towards that. Like that's a man you want to fight and die for. And our priest, like before everything was completely shut down, was already like, okay, well, we're going to do confessions and we're going to make sure there's social distance. We're going to try this, you know what I mean? And when the bishop says, no, we're shutting everything down, he's like, okay, well, I'm going to go through the proper channels and I'm going to get that up again because it's not incumbent upon the laity. It's not incumbent upon me as a priest. And yeah, it's hard. It's no question about it that you discover the importance of the Mass, the importance of that pinnacle of our Christian faith. And it becomes a fix. And the question is like not allowing your sense of, not turning the liturgy into a drug that you just need every single Sunday to get fixed
drug
off
or
no
an
matter
entitlement.
what.
Like we are
Entitlement.
not entitled. We are not
That's
entitled to this. Like
Yes.
we are the secondary person. The priest is the only thing required to have a valid Mass.
Okay, so can you both tell me what's the difference between Novus Ordo and extraordinary?
Sure.
Simplest terms for those of us who don't understand.
That means short, Jordan.
Oh, I don't have to write the whole book. The extraordinary form is, or commonly known as the Latin Mass, is the form of the Mass that's oldest traced in the Latin Rite. Our current edition, or the most recent one you're going to see, it was mostly codified at the Council of Trent. So this is usually the Mass with very unique elements, such as it is entirely in Latin. It is celebrated ad orientem, which means to the east, which for practical terms is that the priest facing away from the people. So the altar is often built in.
Facing, I think this is one thing I just want to stop you just because I think this is something we can do better. Not that you're doing, but everyone does this, is not saying facing away from the people, facing towards God.
Yeah,
but not making it a negative sound.
Yeah,
exactly. That's what people say. It's facing, no,
that's
towards God.
Thank you for that. Yeah, because that's a common kind of critique that you hear versus populum, which literally means like towards the people, which is what most or a lot of Novus Ordo celebrate. Although you can see a Novus Ordo in ad orientem.
And what is Novus Ordo?
That'll be.
Novus Ordo is the traditional Mass, or is the Mass, that is the one that we know today that's in the vernacular that came post-conciliar. That's the Mass that people would know. It's the normal Mass that people would go to. But the thing that go back to ad orientem, I think one of the things with ad orientem that I think is it's kind of gaining traction, even in an ordinary form community, is the fact that this understanding is the priest in the current towards the people, the priest becomes the spotlight.
Yeah.
The priest becomes a practitioner of almost like acting, and has a certain persona, has a certain thing, an affect, and his personality becomes more important in the Mass. Whereas ad orientem, the priest is really talking and praying on our behalf towards God, and that's an important distinction. So even whether or not it's the ordinary form or the Novus Ordo is really facing towards God, taking away the priest's personality and his little things, and when you're facing the people, it's very easy to kind of ad-lib your little adding things. How many Masses have you been to where the priest will kind of add a little things and stuff like that? It's very disconcerting because it takes away from what's happening there, right?
So is there one that you recommend to go to?
I think at the very least, ad orientem, even if it's an ordinary form Mass, I think ad orientem just makes sense. And how they get away with this is, and when these abuses where they come about is, at St. Peter's.
And the abuses,
liturgical abuses.
Okay.
All these things started with liturgical abuse that then became normative, and now they're what we call regular
And what
practices.
are the liturgical abuses?
Well, one of them would be that. One of them would be we can start hand-holding during the Our Father. There's plenty of examples of abuses that have come about. Another abuse that I think is one of the most fascinating abuses in the church that no one talks about except 12 dioceses in the country is confirmation. That was an abuse. That started as an abuse. Confirmation was always done as a child, very young.
Yeah, my parents were.
And then it was changed through as a lot of things start with the French, and there were these abuses. And I think it was the 16th or 17th century, and they reordered the sacraments. But the sacraments of initiation, the confirmation was never the primary. The confirmation was the middle. The Eucharist is the final.
Yeah, so it's like my parents were either on their baptism all the times, you'll have kids who were confirmed, or it happens, my parents think it happened, months after they were baptized, honestly. Yeah.
Usually it's by 3 or 4 years old, they've already been, a child's been confirmed.
Wow.
But now we've made it into Catholic Eagle Scout projects, and that's what
it's a graduation from Catholicism. This is a joke.
Yeah, so it's a problem. But these are all abuses that kind of become normative. But in the way the Novus Ordo, specifically within the ad orientem, came about was they had this desire to push the priests viewing the people, like there was more of a show. But how they made the case was at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, the Pope faces the people. But again, this is where it's frustrating. When I studied over there, we learned this. The reason the Pope always faced the people in Rome is because of where St. Peter's body is buried on the hill. They had to build the church out a certain direction, so that in order to face true east, in order for all those things to happen, the altar had to be where the bishop, the Pope, was facing that direction. But that's what they say. Well, it happens in St. Peter's, but St. Peter's has a special dispensation because of the way it's built on the hill where St. Peter was buried. But again, even these things, at the end of the day, I like what you said earlier, Jordan, is when we go to these, there's plenty of masses I've been to where I've been frustrated. I'm not going to lie to you. I've made a deal that I will never step foot at a mass again in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles Cathedral. And I'm just going to, I can't.
I'm with you.
I can't. It's very disconcerting. And and my biggest frustration is we have a generational issue where priests and bishops have been taught things. So I don't blame them because this is what they were taught. But we have an issue, and people are not taking to heart the fact that the liturgy is the most important part of our faith. The liturgical life of the church is just as important as the good works that we do through Catholic charities and other entities. The liturgical life of the church has to be a paramount of all things we do. But from good liturgy, from understanding our relationship with Christ through liturgical practices, that is where the good works come out of. It can't be the other way around. And I referred to it in your previous show, was the idea of that we think, a lot of people unfortunately think of the church and bishops especially as the church is an NGO. We're just a charitable organization that does nice things. Right. And we come together and do this thing, and we have a meal together, this liturgical meal. But that's not what we are. We are supposed to be bringing the light to the world through the Eucharist, through the sacraments, and from that good works come out of that. And that's why that stuff's important.
I even just want to, on that note, I even want to even just frame almost the, one of the things oftentimes we talk about in terms of the factions of the church is there's an all things true in stereotypes. There's all grains of salt. There are grains of salt of truth that are true in stereotypes. It's like in the extraordinary form in traditional communities, what you often find the first is to go is charity, and for the Novus Ordo, it's like the first thing that goes is orthodoxy.
Why do you say that?
That's a stereotype. That's a charity. So that's the thing. It's like, and that makes a lot of sense. And by it makes a lot of sense, I mean, I understand the history of it. I'm not saying I agree with it, quite the opposite, which is why, again, I want to go out, I want to bring everybody in. And, but it's like, you have people who feel like they need to circle the wagons because, there was an active persecution. The way that we think about now, a priest who wants to say Latin mass now, post Summorum Pontificum, can do it, right? And he's just totally good. I've been reading a lot of documentation from the 90s and the 2000s here in California. And what I found out is that there was plenty of times for people to just want to ask very reverently, properly to Mahoney, to other bishops about...
To Cardinal Mahoney.
Mahoney, yes. I mean, and who built the Taj Mahoney, which is...
which is a problem.
Which is a problem, yeah. But what you find out is people who... And again, most people, hot or cold on both sides, most Catholics just want to... really are called to live the Lord and love the Lord and to serve him in the best way that they possibly can. And yeah, they were shut down, and there's no question about that. There's no question that sort of thing was active, especially here.
But I would argue that's a generational thing more than anything.
I think it is, yeah.
I don't know that there's people that are necessarily evil and have some this is how I'm going to punish these people. I just think there's a generational belief that one thing is better than the other, and they think that this other thing... I think there's a fear from people of a certain generation, specifically priests and bishops, that the extraordinary form brings in bad behavior. It brings in people who are just going to be naysayers, who are going to be negative Nancys, who are just looking to be able to have a thing that makes them different. I don't think that's right, but I can see where they can come to that conclusion. So my point is this. At the end of the day, all this discussion, if you find yourself at peace and you find yourself closer to the Lord in the extraordinary form in your community, then do that. But do it with joy, do it with reverence. Understand that your ability to go to Mass is a gift, not something you're owed, and do it with that in a way that makes other people want to join you. Period. End. The more we do that, we focus in on our own interior existence and not pointing out everyone else's flaws, the better off we're going to be. And I'm also bad about this. As someone that spent many years studying liturgy and as a master of ceremonies at a cathedral and all these things, it's very easy for me to go to masses and be very upset because a priest isn't doing X, Y, or Z.
And I think that seems to be the biggest worry, is that everyone's worried about the lack of reverence.
For sure. This is what I was talking about earlier today, that I found myself...
not even with the priest, but now it affecting the laymen that are there.
Well, no, look at most of the parishes in California have now put these video screens in their churches, and
I-
all the parishes where the choir has now been moved up. and it's-
moved up to
these performances. We're trying to keep up with the Protestants, and what we have going for us that they don't have is the truth and the sacraments.
I can tell you one of my driving forces is that I think about this a lot of time. I grew up in a small church and in a small community. So a lot of my friends who were with me as Catholic friends also were school friends. And now I speculate how many of them are just outside the faith. You know, again, the joke is you graduate at confirmation. People in my formation, we grew up and there wasn't an exposition of leading through beauty. There was an exposition of what reverence. I didn't hear about reverence genuinely like that until I hit college. And actually started going out seeking. Not because the people who taught me the faith were unwilling to do that kind of thing, because they themselves just weren't trained to understand the faith in that sort of way. The choir who sang with their guitars and tambourines and, Eagle's Wings, of course, Sing to the Mountains, Sing to the Seas was like our parish's one. Oh, man. And a lot of things. I mean, these people were loving the Lord and serving him in the best way that they can.
But if I may, this is also something that's problematic. People have these gifts that they're offering to the church, but it's out of their own desire
That's exactly
to do their thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
How many times have I met a guitar player who's like, this is my way. Well, your way is wrong. The church has said it. Read any church document on music, and it's just wrong. So just follow what the church says. I think all of these things can be resolved if we just do what the church, in her infinite wisdom, comes to.
And what you see a lot of times with even if they're celebrating it in the vernacular, but there are a lot of priest testimonies nowadays that are coming out where they've started, a lot of times the first thing they'll do is do ad orientem, or they'll try it out, and they might never touch Latin mass as long as they live. But what they find is true. It's like the pressure of performance, a lot of these people saying is removed from them.
It just doesn't make sense to face the people. In the words, everything does not make sense. And the priest is always staring up into some corner of the church just to look up to it. Just the whole thing is dumb.
Okay, so can we talk one topic that I've really been wanting to get on is decorum in the church, because this seems to be a big thing.
For the people?
For the people.
Okay.
So decorum more so in presentation of dress. Example would be when we talked about the hand holding, non-hand holding, the kissing.
Everything comes down to, so I'm just going to be very clear on this. One, because it's really warm, and but two, because of the fact that I think a lot of this stuff can be resolved by one simple principle. Okay. There's a saying for priests in the seminary, it comes out, it's called say the black, do the red. Have you heard this expression?
No.
In the Missal, in the Novus Ordo, there's things in black and things in red. Yep. The red means it tells you what to do. The black tells you things to say. Okay. Do that. Yeah. When it comes to as Catholics, there are so many things that we've added to our gestures and to our practices that have no purpose except for the fact that we just do them because people do them. I'm going to give you a couple examples. One in particular. When we leave Mass, what is the first thing we do before we walk out the doors? Cross. But with what?
Holy water.
Why? It's the first thing we do when we come in, but why is it the last thing we do when we leave?
That's a good question.
Why do we do it? We do it when we come in because it's a reminder of our baptismal promises, correct?
Okay,
That's why we do it. That's with the holy water, reminding ourselves that when we leave, we just received Jesus Christ. We have Christ dwelling within us in a very active and real way. Why are we doing the same thing going out to remind us of our baptismal promises when we've been completely fulfilled in the Eucharist? These are things that we've added over time that we just do. And so I'm really against the idea of doing for doing's sake. Another example. And this is not saying you can't do it. It's just saying the church doesn't ask us to. So I guess my point is we should never add things that the church has not asked us to do. So another example would be something that people don't do except the priest does, but we're also called to do is anytime the Blessed Mother's name, Jesus Christ is mentioned, or the Trinity, or the saint of the day, we're supposed to bow. The same thing goes to like making the sign of the cross. When we receive a blessing, we do something. We make the sign of the cross. When we make the sign of the cross, it's a form of prayer. It's a form of invoking something. But why, when we're receiving a blessing, do we make the sign of the cross to invoke something when we really should just bow to receive, right? But these are all gestures. Not saying you can't do them, but the church has not asked us to do them. Yes. So my point to Decorum is, let's get back to what the church asks us to do in her infinite wisdom and not add a bunch of things that we just have done because this is what we do. And that's, I think, where we get into problems because everyone just does things. Why do we hold hands? Because we do.
Yeah, I think, again, it's like one of the most touching experiences in liturgy I ever had was at St. Victor's. There was a young woman in front of me, and she was in t-shirt and sweats. And again, this is the extraordinary form. And of course, it's funny because
But a veil.
Oh yeah, but never mind. But she's good, right? And it's funny because actually, Father Fryer, a couple weeks prior, had actually given a homily talking about how you come and there are ways that we understand on things like the reverence of dress and modesty and all these kind of things. If I see someone who's not dressed in the way that I want them to dress, I can't just pull them aside because I don't even know the person. But what I did is I was just curious, right? Because I knew that she wasn't like really following along in the missal, so I actually gave her like my missal. And I was like, here's where we're at. We're at the epistle. And afterwards I caught up with her and I was like, I know it's really confusing. I'm just kind of new to it too. And I found out that she'd started out as a Hindu. Had gone to Buddhism, now was in this like weird spirituality kind of thing. And I was like, okay, that's all well and good. What brings you to an extraordinary form of the Mass on 7:00 on a Sunday night? And she was like, well, I just know like there's just this like great energy and power here is what she said. And I was like, well, that's Jesus. Mm-hmm. But also I was like, that's crazy because a girl my age, of all places for her to be on a Sunday night in West Hollywood, this is her first encounter with the Mass. And the last thing that we want to do is bring in the little t's of life and really stifle a sort of a soul. So now, because I've grown in my faith, I really felt it, and every year I'm trying to hopefully like modicum that. I understand like the importance of reverence and dress and why I do it. You know what I mean? And what I've also done is on the flip side, I go, and someone else who I don't know, who's new to the Mass, whatever, like these things should grow in them if they want, but at the same time, like it's not my place yet because I don't have a place to do that. Christ wants you there and he wants you to be conformed into him. And yeah, that of course means that does bring in not just the big T's, but a lot of little traditions that you do. And hopefully from those that they grow, and there's a lot of timing and reasons behind everything. Even things that are obscure or things that are away from like the actual rubrics of the church. But the response is that it's all about reverence and why we dress, or it's why we do something, right?
It should be at the end of the day because of love for Christ, not because of trying to be better.
Not because I'm trying to be better. I'm trying to say, look at me or anything like that. Absolutely. I don't wear my tuxedo every time to Sunday Mass.
Just every other.
But I do mostly wear a tie.
Good.
And my bow tie.
Almost every other time I see you in a tux.
It feels good, but it does. You.
So after all of this, what do you say to someone? I mean, you can just think of me. I'm a person who's not officially in the church. So I went through the steps of many coming in. And when you're coming in and you see so much dissension in the way, what do you say to that person to make them... What do you say to that person?
To make them not run away?
Truly, to make them not run away. To say that you can still experience God here. How do you tell them to block out all the noise?
Men are not the church. The church is above people. The church is Jesus Christ. If Jesus Christ in his infinite wisdom created this institution, even with the failings, how can you look at the history of the church and not see God clearly has a plan? There's no way the church should even still be in existence. If you look at generations and generations upon generations of problem and failed people, right? The church is worth fighting for, even in its worst moments.
And why is it worth fighting for?
Because Jesus Christ brought it to us. God entered this world as a man to come to us, to bring us these sacraments because of his love for us and his desire for us to be close with him. If that's what it is, then it's worth everything.
So remember what brought you in.
It's very funny. One thing that is, the more I read about in the gospel accounts of how the apostles interact, there are so many times where Christ is walking besides them and they're arguing about who's going to be the greatest. That a chapter after Christ says to Peter, thou art, Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, he says, get behind me, Satan. It's astounding how many times Christ tells them exactly what's going to happen and how it's going to happen, and they go, no, it's not. They don't get it, And it's part of it is, of course, our human understanding. Part of it's also because it's like, no, Lord, I would never deny you. All these sorts of things. I would never run away. It took Christ appearing in the upper room to really get them going again, So I think that one of the things to remember is precisely on Austin's point. This is our faith. This is the faith of the church. So if you are just going or falling into Catholicism because it's the thing to do as a human, that's going to ultimately lead you, as humans do, into falling. We should hold to the transcendent perfection that is our God, and the Eucharist. And we should hold on to the fact that this is a faith that's been the same for 2,000 years. And it's crazy to me because there's a little joke, and it's a friend loses a bet and tells the other guy, well, you have to check out Catholicism now, and he bumps into him years later and you have to go study Catholicism, like figure it out. And he goes, okay, well, I'll raise that bet. I'm going to go study it in Rome. And his friend says, don't go study it in Rome. Don't do that. And he bumps into him later and he says, hey, how's it going? I just finished studying in Rome. Come on, Mass is right down the road. He says, you're going to still be Catholic? And he goes, if I can go to Rome, study the Catholic faith, see how inefficiently and ineffective the church can be run by humans, and yet that the only way the institution would survive is if God has to be at its helm. And so the fact of the matter is that the Catholic faith as a faith is beautiful. It obviously is the greatest truth that God has expounded on our souls, and we've responded to it accordingly. So that also calls us to love our fellow man inside and outside the church, even at times when we really don't want to love our fellow man.
Beautiful. And so what are the two biggest takeaways, one from each of you, that you want?
I think it's this principle that we have to get beyond ourselves and our own beliefs of what it is to be a faithful Catholic, and just hope for the best in the person next to us. Is if someone isn't doing something right, let's assume the better of the other person. Let's not put them in a box immediately. Not to say that you shouldn't admonish a brother if he's doing something that he shouldn't be doing, but I think we need to take a step back a lot of times and just have a desire that this person is trying to do their best.
Yeah, I absolutely right on that. One thing that's very interesting is that there are a lot of, it's not pretending that issues don't exist, shouldn't be talked about, discussed, debated. And the Catholic Church has actually a really good history of doing all this kind of things. But at the same time, it's making sure that it's not just bellum, it's not just war, but it's also risus, it's also laughter. And the fact of the matter is, again, it's the joy of the gospel, as Austin said earlier. It is the fact that Christ appears to us, and what does he say each and every time? He says, peace be with you. That has to actually be our first and foremost in our life, especially when we talk about how to approach liturgy, how to approach reverence, and just how to grow in devotion. If you realize that Christ is with you and nothing can scathe you past that, then it's harder to get mad about things. It really is. And that's part of the reason why, again, I'm a glad trad, genuinely. There's a lot of, look, I'm a guy who wants to roll up my sleeves, go to war, and like fix a lot of things. In much as I can fix in my imaginary little world, But I understand that also it's just like, I do it. Why do I do it? Because I love the Lord and I want to tell people about him and I want to give a lot of my work to him. So it's all those things coming into one.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Okay, please remember to check out Jordan's podcast, Glad Trad, as well as Mr. Basic Catholic on Instagram. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you guys gained some value from this. And please remember to like and subscribe and stay tuned for some more.